And welcome back to the show. Jews for Racial and Economic Justice is the home for Jewish New Yorkers to organize alongside our neighbors and allies to fight for New York, where community has the freedom, opportunity, and also the resources that are necessary to thrive. Now, JFREJ exists to fight against the status quo and work side by side with other communities to contest for the power to govern ourselves and end the injustices as well as the violence serving the interests of the 1% and hurt everyone else. Well, joining us now to share a little bit more is the Director of Strategic Projects at JFREJ, Leo Ferguson. And if you don't know, again, that's Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. And Leo, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a total pleasure.
Appreciate having you and having this conversation. And I gave a little bit of an intro to our viewers about your organization, but for those who may not know, just give us a little bit more.
So JFREJ was founded 30 years ago and has been working in New York City with, really, defined by its commitment to working locally in New York to fight for racial and economic justice. We've been involved in campaigns for housing justice. We've worked consistently for police accountability and, against police violence for, most of our history. We fought for worker rights, immigrant rights, and against hate violence. So, we've been, grown dramatically and steadily for, a very long time. Our members live in all 5 boroughs and come together, from many different Jewish traditions and, different ethnic and racial backgrounds, all working together to fight for a city that works for everyone.
Yeah. And I know that as we talk about a lot of the challenges across the city, across the state, across the nation, one of the major challenges that we're still dealing and contending with that particularly hits home for you is anti-Semitism. Can you talk to us about the work that you're doing? And first of all, share your perspective on where you see things with regards to anti-Semitism. Are we seeing things becoming better, or are we seeing things getting progressively worse?
Thank you. It's a great question. So JFREJ really dove in and started working on this actually, like, even before the election of Donald Trump. We understood that something was wrong in the way that we were thinking about anti-Semitism, that the conversation about this topic had really been captured by the right and was often used as a tool to silence dissent, stop protesters, all kind of, and really used as like a tool to attack the left in a way that didn't really reflect the values and priorities of Jews, certainly Jews living in the United States. And so we decided that, we had a role to play in trying to think about anti-Semitism in the same way that we think about every other kind of injustice and oppression, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. Think about it intersectionally, think about it with a progressive lens. And so in 2017, right after the election, and then of course we saw the rise of the white nationalist movement, happening almost in tandem with this project that we started, and we were obviously horrified to see Donald Trump become president and bring with him into the White House, the sort of white supremacy in a more virulent and overt form, of a kind that we hadn't seen in decades. And so in 2017, we published our guide, Understanding Anti-Semitism, which was an offering to our movements, which is really, our attempt to sort of like give all of the other social justice movements and other communities who hadn't had to think about this, hadn't had anti-Semitism, thrust in their face in the way that we, had with the Unite the Right rally and, all the kinds of, violence that we've seen since then, to try to frame the issue and give people the information and resources that they needed to understand how to contend with this new wave of really awful white supremacy. At the same time, if there's any kind of silver lining to this, it's a moment in which I think it's become crystal clear just how much the safety and freedom and dignity of Jews is tied up with the safety and dignity and freedom of so many other communities that are under threat from this, far right movement that has now become mainstream. And so, being able to weave those connections between, the safety and freedom and dignity of Black people, including Black Jews and other Jews of color, immigrants, Muslims, LGBTQ folks, all of the communities that have been under threat from the rise of this, white Christian nationalist movement, probably the most accurate way to say it at this point. And is it worse? Is it better? Is it getting better? I think things have moved so quickly in such a short amount of time. I think what we're seeing is the white nationalist movement and the far right in general, transform and sort of reconfigure itself and test out new strategies and tactics just at the same time as we in the resistance, with our very different vision for the future, also test out different strategies and tactics. And so we're watching, our enemies reshape and rethink how they operate. And, it's a very scary moment. Trump isn't in the White House anymore. It's easy to, I think, feel sort of complacent, but we know that the movement will likely come back stronger and, sharper, and possibly with even fewer institutional guardrails to keep them from enacting really heinous policies that could harm all of us.
Yeah, well, let me drill down a little bit closer, because when we talk about what we see in New York City, we know that it's not really tied to white nationalists, we believe, but we believe that there is this Jewish hate, and anti-Semitism is real. We've seen it before Trump was in office, and now I think even in New York City, when we look at some of the crimes that are being committed, they don't get the tie towards white nationalism, but they do get a tie towards the ignorant people, and also people who just generally just have this sense of hatred.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as a lifelong New Yorker, it is obviously, really sad for me to see, the rise in anti-Semitism and rise in all other kinds of anti-Asian hate violence, all of the things that have swept through our city in the past couple of years. And, the work that we do at JFridge is about, once again, it's about, understanding that all of our fates are tied together. And so, we've worked very closely with our, other partner organizations in the Asian community and, communities all across New York to come up with the kind of collective response to hate violence that we think we need to see. But just to address the specific piece that you brought up there about white nationalism in New York. So I think one of the things that's hard for people to understand, and that includes Jews, right? It's something that I think a lot of Jews haven't had to think about for a long time, is understanding that that anti-Semitism is a systemic oppression. It's been around for 2,000 years in our world, unfortunately, and it should be understood in much the same way that we understand anti-Blackness, anti-Black racism, right, or other forms of oppression, which is they're out there, right? They're in the water, and they're when there are politicians and folks like that who want to sow division, they can activate this machinery that sort of brings this stuff to the surface. And so, unfortunately, it shouldn't be surprising. It should be horrifying. It should be reprehensible, but it shouldn't be surprising that when folks on the right are going on cable news and advancing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, or doing the kinds of, when you have Tucker Carlson talking about white replacement theory on his show and things like that, right? That stuff is going to leak out into the ecosystem, and that means that folks who are people with mental illness, people who have some other kind of are angry for some other reason, that will become the locus of their rage. It doesn't have to make any sense. And I think if you look at the anti-Semitic hate violence that's happened in New York City, what you'll see is that overwhelmingly it's vandalism. It's people like drawing swastikas in places, right?
Right.
You'll find a lot of folks who are anecdotally at least, or based on news reports, right, a really strong link between mental illness and, any kind of actual physical attack, or, a lot of the arrests that have been made by the hate crimes task force, it's mental illness, right? And at least that's playing a role. So it's, when you think about this, and when you think about that, a lot of this stuff is probably being done by teens, right? Youth, like, the swastika stuff, right? It's, the number of people who have a deep-seated, well thought out, small, right? What you're seeing is other things getting caught up in the maelstrom of, conspiracy theories and anti-Jewish rhetoric that is coming, unfortunately, from very powerful people on cable news and on Twitter and filtering out into the ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, as we talk about anti-Semitism, I want to switch focus for a minute and talk about another part of your advocacy, and that's really dealing with the immigrants, because we know that immigrants face a huge challenge. We know the immigration, and I've talked to immigration lawyers right here on the show who've shared that since COVID and during COVID, they've seen a rise in the workload and the caseload, but that doesn't stop the fact that people are still needing services as well as advocacy as well. So how have you approached the issue of immigration within your organization?
Absolutely. So the main focus of our work, at least in the past few years around immigration, has been around getting people out of immigration detention and fighting ICE and ICE raids and the kind of state violence and state terrorism that has, that unfortunately was, ramped up into a fever pitch during Trump, when we had children being put in cages. And when you have COVID, adding to that and making immigration detention, a potential death sentence for folks, that really kicked our work into overdrive. And so, in partnership with, Never Again Action was is an effort that was helped. JFridge played a role in helping to form it, and it has worked all over the place to bring attention to the plight of people in immigration detention and to actually get people out. And so, for example, I'm very proud of the work that we did. As COVID was spreading, we, much of our work, right, we sort of had to turn on a dime and address the threat that was right in front of us. And so we launched a campaign called Let My People Go, which was, this was all happening around Passover. And so it was an obvious, connection for us to be able to be working really intensely. And our members just dove in. They understood immediately what a threat it was and how, this was a ticking time bomb, for folks who were trapped in immigration detention. And so we raised, a ton of money for bail funds, both jails and immigration detention, I should say. Raised a ton of money to get people out. We managed to get, many, many people out of, bail many, many people out of detention. And, it was both, really powerful for us, and also in some ways demoralizing, because there's so many people who are still there. There's so many people who, because of the, completely capricious and unjust nature of our immigration detention system, aren't even eligible for bail, or, can have bail denied for no apparent reason. And obviously, right, all you have to do is look at what's happening at Rikers right now to understand, that this problem, the system of mass incarceration, of putting people in cages, is just, it's a profoundly anti-human and unjust system that, we all have a responsibility to try to dismantle. And that actually, if I could just add very briefly, that connects to our work around hate violence, in the sense that the thing that we understand is that the system that we have now is not the system that we need to address it. And that, throwing police, the NYPD, the hate crimes task force, those have been the primary responses to hate violence, in the same way that ICE and putting people in jail is the same response to so many other problems that we have, and that none of those things are actually making any of us safe, and in many cases, are leading to so much more harm and hurt.
Well, you kind of like led into my next question, because we were talking, as you talked about the NYPD, I know that there is a task force that's out there that deals with these things. And I was going to ask, with your work in the community, with boots on the ground, the effectiveness of what's being done. Do you feel as though that there is any effectiveness, given the fact that there is this task force and people who are supposed to be more of watchdogs and really, assisting in the aid of those persons when it comes to hate crimes?
Absolutely. So no, I would say certainly not. I think that part of what has been so angering for us, and I think unfortunately, right, with the rise in anti-Asian hate violence, like many other folks from other communities are now understanding this, which is that sending the police out is, it's window dressing. It's something that politicians like to do because it lets them show themselves an immediate way. But if we really want to confront the problem of bias, hate violence, and anti-Jewish bias, other kinds of systemic hatred, we understand that the only effective way to deal with that is through education. It's through working with local communities, right? It's the things that we would understand instinctively would actually change the facts on the ground, which is educating people about their neighbors, building stronger ties between communities, empowering communities through bystander intervention training, so that people understand what to do when they see something going on, right? Like it's by making a city in which all of us feel responsible for our neighbors, the people we see on the train, the people we see on the streets, that we are sticking up for each other. And then, and possibly even more importantly, dealing with the same things that drive every other kind of crime, which is going to be poverty. It's going to be our failing social safety net, our lack of mental health services, right? Again, as I referenced before, when you look at the breakdown of, what is actually causing these incidents, right? It's, almost none of them, very few of them actually involve physical violence. The ones that do are often tied to mental health issues, right? Like this is not something in which a police response after the fact makes sense. And certainly, the way that we actually got into the hate violence work one of the incidents that brought us into this was when, the police, someone had drawn a swastika on a playground in Queens, in Rego Park, and the police arrested them, and it was a 14-year-old kid, and they sent out, it was this triumphant tweet saying, "We have zero tolerance, we've caught the perpetrator." And we just thought, this is nuts, right? This makes no sense. This is not a response that's going to make anybody any safer, and is not appropriate. So that's our perspective on this.
So how would you, if you had your ideal way, how would it be implemented in a way that we can deal with combating hate violence?
Well, we've been trying, with the funds that we have, and I wish that we had a lot more, we've been trying to make this a reality. And by working within, the truth is that communities across the city have been doing this work in various ways with, profoundly under-resourced for years. We know how to do this. So you have things like restorative justice programs. You have things like upstander intervention trainings that are incredibly effective. So being done by the Center for Anti-Violence Education. We have our partners at the New York City Anti-Violence Project that have been working with the LGBTQ community for years. Folks at the Audre Lorde Project, Safe Outside the System. Drum, working with South Asian communities in Queens and Brooklyn. The Arab American Association of New York, folks all over the place who have had to deal with this in their communities and understand that if they want to create safety, the only way we're going to create it is by creating it for ourselves. Certainly, the kinds of community building work that so many of those folks have done with all of the diverse communities that live throughout New York City. Those are the kinds of things that are really going to build real safety in the future. And what we really need more than anything is resources, right? We had to fight tooth and nail to get, a little over $1 million in 2020 in order to fund this work. That all of that funding was cut, or sorry, in 2019, all of that funding was cut in 2020 by the city council. We've had to fight tooth and nail to get a small part of that restored. The mayor's office, in the meantime, has done some, good work and funded a program for, at about $3 million for a bunch of community groups to be working on this. But $3 million split across, dozens of organizations in a city of 8 million people is not going to get the job done. And at the same time, we're pouring, $11 billion a year into the NYPD budget. This is just, again, a set of priorities that doesn't make sense if we really want to get serious about the safety of our communities. If what we want is for politicians to have, a quick, easy thing that they can go on TV with, that shows a bunch of, cops flooding into a community after something's happened, then keep the system that you have. If you want to have a real safety for New Yorkers, then we need a very different set of investments.
So you would be supportive of reallocation of police funds for community resources?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is just one of many, many examples in which, when we think about public safety seriously, when we think about public safety as something more than just catching bank robbers, we understand that, the things that, listen, we're in a pandemic that's still killing, that has killed tens of thousands of New Yorkers, that is still killing New Yorkers today. We understand that, poverty, again, our tattered social safety net, our lack of, the lack of health care and other services, like these are the things that are making us unsafe. And the balance is just wildly off. We need to be investing in, the things that are actually harming our communities and not in the things that, I think a lot of people are afraid, right? It's understandable that there's a sort of visceral fear of street crime. But the truth is that the things that are actually most likely to harm us, that have been harming us, right, for decades, are the things that we're failing to tackle. So our investments are in the wrong place.
Before we go, please let our viewers know how they can support the work and be connected to some of the advocacy that you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much for that invitation. We'd love to have anyone to come and join our, this is a beautiful, diverse community. You do not have to be a Jew to be a member of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. We have incredible caucuses that are doing, doing incredible work in our wonderful communities for Jewish people of color, for Mizrahi and Sephardi Jews, for poor and working class Jews. It's an intergenerational organization with tons of older folks, tons of younger folks doing incredible work around care and getting people all the kinds of different care that they need. So please come to www.jfridge.org. And now is an especially great time to do it because on the 16th, we have our Mazals Awards, which are our incredible gathering for our entire community to celebrate the work that we've done over the course of the year and to celebrate lots of other community leaders and people from throughout New York City who have been making an amazing contribution to this beautiful place that we all call home. So you can go to our website, jfridge.org, and find out about how to come to that event. We'd love to have you there.
Leo, thank you so much for being with us and sharing with us. Leo Ferguson, Director of Strategic Projects for the Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. Thank you so much for introducing our viewers to your organization and the work that you do.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really wonderful. Thank you.
All righty. Well, we're taking a quick break. We want you to stay with us. We've got a little bit more ahead on the social justice forums. So stay with us. We'll be right back.